There is a moment, and I want you to understand this clearly, where a person you love stops trying to fix things with you. It doesn't look like anger. It doesn't look like a fight. It looks like peace. And that is exactly what makes it so dangerous, because by the time it looks peaceful, it is already over. I have studied human behavior for a long time, and there is one pattern that almost nobody sees coming, even though it happens right in front of them, slowly, in plain sight. It is the pattern of how a deeply caring person, the kind of person who notices when you're upset before you say a word, the kind of person who remembers your coffee order and your mother's birthday and the small thing that hurt you 3 years ago, quietly reaches a point where they stop. Not stop caring, stop trying. And those are two very different things. Most people think you'll see it coming. You won't. Because the person about to disappear from your life emotionally has spent years training themselves to hide exactly how much you're hurting them. That's not weakness. That is one of the most disciplined emotional skills a human being can develop. And today I'm going to walk you through exactly how it happens, stage by stage, so you can recognize it in your own life, either as the person doing the damage or as the person absorbing it. Let's start with something most people get completely backwards. They think empathy is softness. They think a highly empathetic person is easy to read, easy to predict, easy to keep around no matter what you do. That assumption is the single biggest mistake people make with emotionally attuned people. Because underneath that softness is one of the most sophisticated threat detection systems a human mind can run. An empath isn't just a nice person. Their nervous system is wired to pick up on microsignals the rest of us miss entirely. A slight change in tone, a half-second delay before someone answers a question, the tension in someone's jaw when they say, "I'm fine." This isn't a personality quirk. It's a survival mechanism, and it means they are constantly processing far more emotional data than the people around them realize. Here's the part that changes everything. Because they can read pain in others so easily, they assume everyone can do the same for them. So when they're hurting, they don't always say it directly. They expect it to be noticed, the same way they notice it in you. And when it isn't noticed, again and again and again, something starts to shift. Not overnight, slowly. And that slow shift is what we're going to break down piece by piece, because inside it is a pattern that repeats in almost every relationship where a caring person eventually walks away. Before I go further, I want you to hold on to one idea because we're coming back to it later and it will change how you see every relationship in your life. The people who leave the loudest were never actually that invested. The people who leave the quietest were invested completely. Remember that. We'll return to it. Now let's talk about what I call the first stage. The stage almost nobody notices while it's happening because it doesn't look like a problem at all. It looks like generosity. This is the stage where the empath becomes the emotional processing center for everyone around them. Friends bring their breakups. Coworkers bring their stress. Family members bring their decades of unresolved history. And the empath absorbs all of it because that is what their nervous system is built to do, and because on some level, being needed feels like being valued. Here's the danger hiding inside that stage. Every single person who unloads onto them assumes someone else is checking in on the empath. The friend assumes the family checks in. The family assumes the partner checks in. The partner assumes the friends check in. And because everyone assumes someone else is carrying that responsibility, nobody actually does it. The empath becomes surrounded by people and completely unsupported at the same time. That contradiction is the seed of everything that follows. If you want a real diagnostic question, here it is. Ask yourself right now about the most emotionally generous person in your life. When was the last time you asked them how they were actually doing, and then sat quietly and let them answer without immediately turning the conversation back to yourself? If you're struggling to remember, you already have your answer, and so do they, even if they've never said it out loud. This is where the second stage begins, and this one is more dangerous because it's invisible even to the empath themselves at first. Psychologists have a term for what happens when a person is exposed to ongoing emotional demand without recovery time. It's called allostatic load. It's the slow buildup of stress hormones in the body from chronic, low-grade pressure that never fully resets. Your body doesn't need one massive trauma to break down. It can break down just as effectively from 1,000 small demands that never stop coming. This is exactly what happens inside an empath who keeps giving without receiving. Each unappreciated effort, each ignored feeling, each time they explain themselves and nothing changes. None of those moments feel catastrophic on their own. But your nervous system doesn't measure pain in single events. It measures cumulative load. And cumulative load over months and years rewires how a person responds to you, whether they want it to or not. Here's what that rewiring looks like from the outside, and I want you to pay close attention, because this is the first visible sign, and almost everyone misreads it. The empath starts pulling back their emotional energy in small, deniable ways. They take longer to respond to messages, they stop initiating plans, they give shorter answers. On the surface, it looks like they're just busy, just tired, just going through something. That's what everyone tells themselves, because that story is more comfortable than the truth. The truth is that their nervous system has quietly started protecting them without asking permission from their conscious mind. This is not a decision they're making at the dinner table. This is a biological response to sustained emotional depletion, the same mechanism that makes you flinch away from a hot stove after you've been burned enough times. They are flinching away from you, and they may not even fully realize it yet. Now here's the part that most people completely miss, and it's the reason this pattern is so hard to catch in real time. Because the pullback is gradual and deniable, the people around the empath don't adjust their behavior. They keep taking. They keep assuming the well is bottomless. Some of them even increase their demands because the empath has never had firm boundaries before, so why would they start now? This is where the gap between what's being given and what's being taken becomes a canyon, and almost nobody on the other side notices because they've never had to notice. They've never needed to. I want to pause here and give you something concrete, a psychological principle that explains why this specific dynamic is so destructive, more destructive than almost any other relationship pattern. It's called the reciprocity imbalance effect. Humans are wired, from an evolutionary standpoint, to expect roughly equal exchange in close relationships. When that exchange becomes lopsided for too long, the person giving more doesn't just feel tired. They begin to feel something far more corrosive. They begin to feel used. And feeling used is different from feeling hurt. Hurt can be repaired with an apology. Being used requires something much harder to rebuild. Trust that the relationship was ever equal to begin with. This is the moment, right here, where a normal disappointment starts turning into something else entirely. Something that doesn't heal the way an argument heals. Keep that in mind, because we're about to enter the stage where things start becoming almost impossible to reverse. Stage 3 is what I call the audit phase, and if you've never heard this term before, you're about to understand something that will change how you interpret silence for the rest of your life. During the audit phase, the empath stops trying to communicate their pain outward and instead starts quietly cataloging it inward. Every unreturned effort, every broken promise, every time they showed up and nobody showed up for them. They're not being dramatic. They're not keeping score to punish you. Their mind is simply doing what minds do when direct communication has repeatedly failed to produce change. It starts gathering evidence for a decision it hasn't consciously made yet. Here is the single most important thing to understand about this phase. The audit happens almost entirely in silence. From the outside, it can look like the relationship has actually calmed down. The arguments stop. The confrontations stop. The pleading stops. And most people breathe a sigh of relief, thinking things have finally settled. This is one of the most dangerous misreadings in all of human relationships, because that silence isn't peace. It's the sound of someone quietly building a case for their own exit, without even realizing that's what they're doing. Let me give you a way to actually recognize this stage while it's happening, because recognizing it early is the only way to reverse it. Listen for the specific word choice. In the earlier stages, a hurting empath will say things like, "I need you to understand how this makes me feel," or "Can we talk about this?" Phrases that are requests for change. In the audit phase, the language shifts. It becomes flatter, less demanding, more like observation. "It's fine. Don't worry about it. It doesn't matter." These aren't signs of resolution. These are signs of withdrawal disguised as agreeableness. And if you hear this shift happening in someone close to you, that is your window. That window does not stay open forever. I want to tell you about a pattern I've seen described over and over in behavioral interviews and long-term relationship studies, something that catches almost everyone off guard. It's called the extinction burst, and it comes from basic behavioral psychology. When a behavior that used to get a response suddenly stops working, there is often one final, intense attempt to get that old response back before the behavior disappears completely. In relationships, this can look like a sudden, uncharacteristic outburst from someone who has been quiet for a long time, a rare moment of raised voice, a blunt, unfiltered comment that feels shocking coming from someone usually so composed. Here's what almost everyone gets wrong about that moment. They interpret it as the relationship getting worse. In reality, it's often the last flare of genuine emotional investment before it goes out completely. It is the nervous system's final attempt to provoke a real reaction, a real change, one last time, before it gives up trying entirely. If that moment is met with defensiveness instead of genuine reflection, something closes. And once it closes, in an empath, it rarely opens again the same way. This brings us to stage 4, the stage that gives this whole pattern its name. This is the breaking point. And I need to correct something right away, something almost every piece of content on this topic gets wrong. The breaking point is not an event. It is not a single fight, a single betrayal, a single moment you can point to on a calendar. The breaking point is a threshold that gets crossed silently, usually during an ordinary, forgettable moment that has nothing dramatic about it at all. This is critical to understand because it means you cannot predict it by watching for a big blow-up. There often isn't one. Instead, there's a specific internal shift, and I want to describe it precisely, because once you understand what actually changes, you'll never look at a quiet, calm person the same way again. Before the breaking point, every act of kindness from the empath comes with an unconscious hope attached to it. Hope that this time will be different. Hope that the effort will finally be reciprocated. Hope that the relationship can still become what they always believed it could be. That hope is exhausting to carry, but it's also what keeps a person emotionally engaged, even through repeated disappointment. After the breaking point, that hope is simply gone. Not suppressed, not hidden. Gone. And here's the part that surprises people every single time. The empath doesn't necessarily become cold or angry or distant in an obvious way. In many cases, they become more pleasant, more agreeable, easier to be around, on the surface. Because once hope disappears, so does the emotional friction of constantly hoping for change that isn't coming. What replaces it isn't hostility, it's detachment. And detachment is quiet in a way that anger never is. This is the moment I want you to really sit with, because it explains something that confuses almost everyone who has ever lost a deeply caring person from their life. They ask, why didn't they fight for it? Why didn't they get angry? Why did they just leave? The answer is that fighting requires hope. Anger requires investment. By the time an empath actually walks away calmly, without a scene, the emotional investment left months, sometimes years, before their body did. What you're witnessing when they finally leave isn't the ending. It's the funeral. The relationship already died quietly, a long time before that. I want to give you a mental model that will help this make sense on a deeper level, because I think it's one of the more useful ways to understand emotional withdrawal in general. Think of emotional investment like a bank account. Every kind word, every act of genuine consideration, every moment of being truly seen, that's a deposit. Every ignored feeling, every broken promise, every moment of being taken for granted, that's a withdrawal. Most relationships survive plenty of withdrawals, as long as there are enough deposits to keep the balance positive. The specific danger with highly empathetic people is that they are constant, almost compulsive depositors. They put emotional currency into the account of every relationship they're part of, all day, every day, often without even realizing they're doing it. Which means the account can absorb an enormous number of withdrawals before it actually goes to zero. This is exactly why the people around them so often believe there's no limit at all. They've simply never seen the balance run out before, because it took so unbelievably long to get there. But here is the thing. Nobody tells you about an account that goes to zero after years of steady withdrawal instead of one dramatic loss. It doesn't refill quickly. In many cases, it doesn't refill at all. Let's talk about what happens after the breaking point, because this is where the real consequences show up. And this is the part most people watching this are here for. Once the account hits zero, the empath doesn't become a different person exactly, but they operate by a completely different internal rulebook. And the shift is almost always the same, across nearly every case I've studied. The first change is that their patience becomes conditional instead of automatic. Before the breaking point, patience was their default setting. It was extended to everyone, constantly, regardless of what they got back. After the breaking point, patience has to be earned. This sounds small when I say it out loud, but understand what it actually means in practice. It means the excuses stop. It means the benefit of the doubt stops being given automatically. It means repeated behavior gets read as a pattern instead of an accident, and patterns don't get the same forgiveness that accidents do. The second change is more subtle, and it's the one that surprises people the most. The empath stops explaining themselves. This one throws people off because it looks like communication has improved since there's less conflict. In reality, they've stopped explaining because they've concluded that explanation doesn't produce change, so there's no point spending the energy. Silence, in this context, isn't peace. It's a verdict that's already been reached. The third change is the one with the deepest long-term consequences, and it's the one I most want you to understand. Whether you're the empath in this story or the person on the other side of it, the empath develops what I'll call selective permanence. Before the breaking point, they believed almost anyone could change if given enough patience and enough chances. After the breaking point, that belief doesn't disappear entirely, but it becomes far more specific. They stop believing people will change simply because they're given more time. They start believing people change only when there are real consequences for staying the same. And once someone reaches that conclusion about you specifically, no amount of apologizing moves them the way it used to, because apology without consequence has already been proven through direct personal experience to mean very little. Here is something that will reframe how you see all of this, and I think it's one of the most important points in this entire video. Many people believe the opposite of love is hate. It isn't. The opposite of love is indifference. Hate still requires energy. It still requires the other person to occupy space in your mind. Indifference means they don't. Indifference means you could walk past them tomorrow and feel roughly the same thing you'd feel walking past a stranger. That is the true end state of a broken empath, and it is far more permanent than anger ever could be, because anger burns itself out. Indifference doesn't need to burn out. It was never burning in the first place. I want to show you how this plays out in real life, because the pattern doesn't just live in relationships between partners. It shows up almost identically in friendships, in families, and even at work. And once you see it in one context, you'll start noticing it everywhere. Think about the friend in a group who always remembers birthdays, always checks in after a hard day, always drives 2 hours to help someone move without being asked twice. For years, that role feels natural to them. Then one day, quietly, they stop organizing the group hangouts. Nobody notices at first because someone else eventually steps up, or the group just gets smaller, and nobody questions why. Nobody asks that person directly, "Hey, why did you stop planning things?" Because on the surface, nothing dramatic happened. There was no fight. There was no announcement. There was just a slow fade that everyone assumed was circumstantial, when in reality, it was the audit phase, playing out exactly the way I described it. Now, I want to speak directly to something a lot of people watching this are probably thinking right now, whether they've admitted it to themselves or not. If you recognize yourself as the person who has been on the receiving end of someone else's endless patience, someone who's been taking a caring person's presence for granted, I want to tell you something important, because there's still time to act on it, but only if you act now, not eventually. The warning signs are not subtle if you know what you're looking for. Shorter responses, less initiation, a flatter tone where there used to be warmth, fewer questions about your day, not out of malice, but because energy that used to be automatically available is now being carefully rationed. If you notice these signs, the worst thing you can do is wait and see if it passes on its own, because by the time it's obvious enough for everyone to notice, you are almost certainly already in the audit phase, or worse, already past the breaking point. What actually works, if there's still time, is not grand gestures. It's not one big apology or one expensive gift or one dramatic promise to change everything overnight. Those tactics tend to fail specifically with empaths because they're the ones who see through performance faster than almost anyone. What works is small, consistent, unglamorous consistency, checking in without being asked, remembering something they mentioned once in passing, actually changing the specific behavior that hurt them, not apologizing for the general category of hurting them, deposits, not declarations. And if you're the empath listening to this, recognizing pieces of your own story and what I've just described, I want to leave you with something different, something that isn't a warning, but a kind of permission. The instinct to keep giving, even when it isn't being returned, isn't a flaw in you. It came from somewhere real, somewhere that once made sense, maybe somewhere that kept you safe or connected when you needed it most. But that instinct was never meant to be unlimited. Boundaries are not the opposite of empathy. They are what allow empathy to survive long enough to matter. A generous heart without boundaries doesn't stay generous forever. It just runs out, quietly, when nobody's watching, and it takes the people who never appreciated it completely by surprise. Remember what I asked you to hold on to earlier in this video. The people who leave loudly were rarely as invested as they seemed. The people who leave quietly were invested completely, for longer than anyone deserved, and they only left after every other option had already been tried and failed and tried again. If there is someone in your life like this right now, someone who has spent years absorbing everyone else's weight without asking anyone to carry theirs, don't wait for the silence to arrive before you finally understand what it means. Because by the time it arrives, you won't be looking at a person who's angry with you. You'll be looking at a person who has already, quietly, completely moved on. And there is nothing louder or more permanent than that particular kind of silence.